Both Labour and the Conservative Party condemn UKIP as being far-right, racist and fascist. But who ordered me in 1975 to murder British citizens in Northern Ireland? UKIP didn't exist then. So, who are you? What are you? Are you racist, fascists, deep state? Anyway, I'll get on with my story about the charge of the Light Brigade, which is one of the most embarrassing battles ever taken place since the original charge of the Light Brigade. The war in the Oman was, the British were winning the war. The SAS were a British Army training team, training the local tribesmen in the hills. And we did a good job. I'm going to say, these people lived in conditions, the same conditions as 2,000 years ago. They didn't have electric, water, no medical aid, nothing. So we won them over. I was giving first aid and medical treatment. Most of them had jaundiced eyes, yellow eyes. Their diet was terrible. They had goat or camel, rice and fish. That was it. Very little fruit and veg. So I often give an injection of multivitamins, which they'd come back in queues to get more of it. They loved it. They'd even bring their women to me, so I was winning them over. A woman would come with her husband, and they'd move 7 layers of clothing so I could see a little fraction of their ass. I didn't know if I was putting the needle in the sciatic nerve or not, but they only give me one shot at hitting the bum. Anyway, but I was winning them over, and I was getting queues of these Arabs outside my tent. One of them came up with toothache, and when he opened his mouth, his teeth were terrible. I thought, which tooth is causing the problem? So I pulled one of them out. I gave him lignocaine, and I had a pair of dental pliers, and I pulled one of them out. But he came back the next day, and he's still moaning that same place sore. So I pulled the next one out. He never came back after that. But I think it was a satisfied customer. But we were winning the people over and doing our job. The Iranian paratroop regiment came into the Oman with the permission of the Shah of Iran, and they built an airport called Midway in the northern part of the Jebel. 2,000 Iranian paratroopers. The British officers were seconded and formed 3 battalions of regular forces, teaching and leading them forces. NCOs were seconded. For instance, a good friend of mine from the Lancers, Charlie Skelton, was in charge of 3 light armoured cars, and we had engineers, RAF regiment. Why? Because the government were making big money. The Sultan was bought 6 Provost jets, which are training jets, but they're fitted out for combat. RAF pilots training Arab pilots. So that was one of our first losses. We had 1 RAF pilot shot down. We'd built a border wall. Donald Trump would have been proud of it. Barbed wire and landmines all the way between Aden and the Oman, with lookout posts and mortar positions all the way along it. We stopped them coming in through that route. So they had to take the camels further north, go through the desert and come down into the Oman. One of the pilots found one of these camel trains and attacked it. But unfortunately for him, they shot him down and they buried him in a pile of stones facing Mecca. So he'd been glad to know that. And we recovered the body. Another pilot was shot down He was going along the border, and soldiers witnessed a SAM-8 fired at him. So everybody was on the radio. There's a SAM-8 on your tail. Eject, eject. But this pilot kept going. He tried to outrun the SAM-8. At the last possible moment, that SAM-8 exploded and flared the back end of the engine like a Christmas cracker. So he's on fire. People are saying, bail out, bail out. And being an Arab pilot, he was more frightened of the sharks in the water. There was lots of sharks in the water around Oman. So he decided he'd rather die landing at Salalah Air Base than parachuting into the shark-infested waters. And I think that aeroplane is there to this day. But he landed it. Not out of fear of sharks, basically. Charlie Skelton and the Lancers helped the SA out a number of times when we'd picked on too many Adu and they were kicking our ass. He'd come in with his light armoured cars and help evacuate from the firefight. He'd put wounded on his armoured car and get them out. We had more guys wounded, paralysed, shot in the chest. This was working with the Firkin, which was our job, British Army training team. When we were working with the tribe, we were helping bringing in jets, artillery, mortars, and manning the radio. That was our job. They didn't have the technical ability to do that. So we worked in the teams, on the hills, everything was going fine. Then one day, everybody got chopped into my position. Intelligence from an Adu that had surrendered gave a weapons cache and an Adu unit only a mile and a half away from my position. So instead of the regular forces attacking this position, the commander of the squadron wanted to do it. Why? It wasn't our job. We were a British Army training team, not a bloody combat unit doing a company attack on an enemy position. That was not our role. But a lot of people don't realise, but officers joined the SAS. They're only there 3 years. It was a stepping stone for getting on further in their careers and becoming generals. It was a big stepping stone. If an officer managed to do the SAS, he was good possibility of being a general in the future, using the soldiers. Because if you got an MM or another medal for being in a firefight, like Lieutenant Colonel Jeeps, he got an MM ordering a bayonet charge against the enemy. So there's our squadron commander deciding he's going for it so he can get his medal. Sod the soldiers. Losing a few SAS wasn't important. His career was more important. So we moved down into this position, and from a mile and a half away the enemy saw us, and fortunately for us, skedaddled out of it. But as we moved in, there was a big cave on my right where we found out that was a hospital that they were running, only a mile and a half from our position. I moved into the clearing, and under my left foot I heard a crack. I thought, oh God, I've stood on a mine. There was a flat bit of sand and a definite crack under my left foot. So I got my bayonet out and I kneeled down. I put the bayonet under my foot and I felt something. I thought, oh shit, I'm going to get my leg blown off, my balls blown off. For what? So this fucking officer can get promotion and become a general. So I didn't panic. I dug away around my foot, and my God, what relief. I found a bunch of used syringes and medical supplies, and a little plastic box that had snapped when I stood on it. What relief I had. But I was angry now. I was angry. It could have been a mine. And my life is getting wasted. for a fucking officer getting promotion. So I was getting aggressive. I mean, SAS often had to go. A little brainwashed, institutionalized, and they couldn't see that we were being used. But I might be an oddball, but I could see it. And that standing on that potential mine made my mind up. I'm not staying in the British Army. I'm getting out of this shit. But I had a wounded Furka Arab in my location, so I stitched him up and he passed out, and I'm thinking, well, I better get him checked out with an x-ray down in Salalah. So we ordered a helicopter to evacuate the wounded Arab, and fortunately I got a couple of days R&R because I was asked to jump in the helicopter and escort him down to base hospital. So I went down and handed over my Arab to 23 PFA, believe it or not. I was down there and I hear muffled explosions. So I was in the bar having a drink. I said, what's all that fucking banging going on? And one of the lads in the bar says, an officer had asked an engineer, how does a trip play work? So the officer and the sergeant engineer went into the ammunition dump, opened a box of trip plays, and as he was explaining, the sergeant was explaining to the officer, they pulled the pin out. They dropped it into the box of flares. They ran and they closed the door behind them. And for a couple of weeks, this massive ammunition dump was exploding. Can't believe it. British Army officer. This is what they were like. Fucking Ruperts. And a stupid crap at engineer. Anyway, when I went back up the hill, who did I have in tow with me? They kicked this engineer, sergeant, to go up with me to make a water pump so that the local women didn't have to go down to the well with their goat skins and come back up with their goat skin full of water on their head. So he was putting a pump in. I think it was to get him out the way because he was in deep shit. But it must have cost millions of pounds. But yeah, Sultan Qaboos could afford it, so more ammunition be sent out from England. But what an officer, what an idiot. Our 4-month tour was coming to an end, and we had 3 guys paralysed. So good idea from the officer. He's gonna, every day down in base camp, he was training, doing a marathon. So he got us picked up by helicopter, put on this road, and decided we'd do a marathon. Well, we'd been eating army rations. I had 100 ulcers in my mouth. I wasn't too healthy, to say the least. So he got us to this starting point, and we had to run down to base camp in Salalah. He won. The odds on, he had all, but he was trying to raise money for the soldiers, the SAS lads that had been wounded. Taylor Woodrow's were making millions, and we were protecting them as they were doing construction work. Airworks were getting the contract to maintain these jets, even though they were getting shot down. Everybody was making big money, but SAS were still on British Army wages. Everybody else was paid by Sultan Qaboos. So I managed to get 6th in this marathon, and I'm thinking all the way down. If the Adu pop up, we didn't even have guns with it. We had Charlie Skelton and a Land Rover, and he was the only one with a gun. Taking a risk again. We had a meal at the end of the run, and I says to this officer, I says, why don't you to use the serial numbers from all the British ammunition they've captured and make the people who supplied the ammunition pay for paraplegic housing in Hereford. Mumford, shut up. I shut up. You can't argue. You're in the British Army. Now I will tell you about the charge of the Light Brigade.